an eminent philosopher among my friends, who can dignify even your ugly furniture by lifting it into the serene light of science, has shown me this pregnant little fact. Your pier glass, or extensive surface of polished steel made to be rubbed by a housemaid, will be minutely and multitudinously scratched in all directions. But place it now against a lighted candle as a center of illumination, and lo, the scratches will seem to arrange themselves in a fine series of concentric circles around that little sun. It is demonstrable that the scratches are going everywhere impartially, and it is only your candle which produces the flattering illusion of concentric arrangement, its light falling with exclusive optical selection. These things are a parable. The scratches are events, and the candle is the egoism of any person. This is a quote from George Eliot's Middlemarch. I read the Penguin Classics edition, and I loved it. I thought it was really great. It was a little slow in the beginning, but towards that last 300 pages, things really began to kick up for me. And that was the famous pier glass metaphor that I think is, the most famed line from the book, sort of talking about the effects of self-centeredness. The candle represents the ego, and everything else is everybody else's lives. And the most important part of this is it's an illusion. It's not really real. It's just how it seems when things are arranged a certain way. And it mirrors the idealism and egoism of many, many, many characters in the novel. But just a little primer on the novel. It is set as a study of provincial life. So a smaller town amidst all this British reform. I believe it's set before Lord Earl Grey. But there was sort of this growing acceptance around more populated areas that reform is super necessary, as, there was an imbalance of seats, and that was disenfranchising people, and just all these different problems with the government system that were taking its toll on the public. But in this more rural town, we see the opposite side of that. And we see that it's a lot of it mirrors our times today, and that's why I think that this book is really important, because the smaller towns end up being more traditional, more socially conservative, wanting to hold values of the past and sort of cling on to that, as opposed to progressing and reforming. And we see this through, namely, Mr. Brooks and Lydgate. Mr. Brooks is a politician, and Lydgate is a doctor. I think Lydgate might have been my second favorite character in the novel, other than Mary Garth, and we'll get to her later. But for now, Mr. Brooks, he's a politician, and he is really, really focused on, his big mission is getting a railroad to go through Middlemarch, so that, they can export more, and overall the town become wealthier. It would be an all-around benefit. But because of the rumors spread about Mr. Brooks, and because of the consequential opinion of him, this gets turned down, not because it's a bad idea, but because people find themselves disagreeing with this notion of Mr. Brooks that they have made in their head that sort of represents everything that they don't like. So they find themselves, the townspeople find themselves unable to act with this railroad, and I think they literally pelt him with tomatoes, and they're heckling him at a speech, and things don't really go well for him. And it's again, not because he's has bad ideas, but because of the setting, because of this small town that is more attached to conservative values. They oppose this reform for seemingly no good reason. And then the second is Lydgate, who I think really represents this idea of the town's approach to improvement. So Lydgate is a doctor, and medicine is not being taken very well. It's, another one of those things that's, a newer development, and as such, Middlemarch doesn't really like it. Not because it's a bad development, again, but because they find themselves disagreeing with Lydgate because they believe him to be involved with Mr. Bulstrode, who is, I think, the one character in the book who is disliked for a good reason. He has all these ill-begotten gains, and ends up being a pretty nefarious character. And everybody believes Lydgate to be involved with Bulstrode when really he's not involved at all, and consequentially end up declining his services. Through this decline of services, Lydgate ends up in a lot of financial turmoil, with his wife Rosamond, as a consequence of the public opinion of him, even though he did absolutely nothing wrong. And that really goes into the sort of disdain for newer services and items. And not only does Lydgate go into all this financial turbulence, but the town itself is experiencing an epidemic of cholera on the outskirts. And through this, just as with Mr. Brooks, they end up shooting themselves in the foot, not listening to what Lydgate has to say, despite the fact that Lydgate is extraordinarily passionate about helping all the people around him. He's sort of put in ill repute by the town, just as Mr. Bulstrode, because of what they believe him to be, not for what he actually is. And another thing that I would like to briefly touch on is how the women are portrayed in the novel. So, of course, George Eliot was one of the first super big feminists, and all the women in the novel are only sort of interested insofar as they can provide for their husband with company and marital value, no real other option. And we could go on and on about, these times where it was either marry or become a nun, but I am also notably a man, so I don't have the sort of authority to grapple with those issues as somebody who have actually dealt with them might. There are some phenomenal lectures on the book that focus on that theme that I would recommend, and I'll put those in the description, that can more provide that insight that I cannot. Another thing that's really important is Dorothy and her idealism, and I love the character arc of her sort of grappling with that. So it starts out with Mr. Casaubon, which is her first husband, and she marries him because, Dorothy is this incredibly intelligent young lady and very, very inspired and ready to attack the world of, science and literature, and she has so much drive for all these different things. So she ends up marrying a man who is a scholar, who is quite older than he is, and that is cause for alarm for many, many different characters in the book. But she ends up marrying him, and he ends up being way more focused on his studies than he is on her, and it ends up becoming a very, very big part of their marriage is their unhappiness. So Casaubon is this guy who looks good on the surface to Dorothy, but ends up being a pretty bad pick. for all of her options. What she ends up doing is, once Casaubon passes away, she marries Will Ladislaw in the end of the novel, who has said time and time again, and other people have told her, he's not very financially secure, he is an artist, he is going to be horrible, he is not going to provide you with what you need, you won't be able to provide him with what he needs because, he needs more than you can give, and all this stuff where people are giving their outside opinions, trying to influence Dorothy, and even Will Ladislaw himself says, you must understand, I love you too, but we can't be together because of our financial circumstances, and that's going to be impeding us a lot. And that's when she really confronts her idealism, I think, and it's really beautiful, where she says, I don't care. Even if things aren't going to be the best, even if things won't be financially secure, even though there are all these different people telling me all these different things, I am going to make a decision for myself and marry you. And that's one of the most beautiful parts of the novel, I would say. I absolutely love that. And having not only that theme of love triumphing, but also that theme of a woman making her own decision in a town that is so extraordinarily attached to these old beliefs. And I think it just... Ladislaw is honest in his shortcomings, and Dorothy still chooses her out of love. I think it's a really beautiful sequence there. Amazing character arc. The other thing is, the other character arc is through Fred Vincy and Mary Garth. So I think a perfect analogy for Mary Garth is Jane Eyre. Mary Garth is also pretty often described as plain. She is a servant and not very Fred Vincy and her are linked through a different man who has passed away now, but Fred was expecting a large sum of money as inheritance, which he didn't get, because this man is kind of stereotypically evil and mistreats Mary Garth. So they've been sort of bonded through this, and Will keeps coming back to Mary and says, you must understand, I love you so much, even though everybody else thinks you're plain and you're weird and you're not really what a boy like me should marry. I think I love you. And it ends up kind of being comedic in the early parts of the novel, of with this sort of, Mary is always like, no, I don't want to marry you. And then he says, do you not love me, or do you not like me? And she says, no, I like you perfectly well. So long as once you go out there and do something with your life and do something amazing and get out of all this debt you're in, then I guess I'll marry you. And it ends up being pretty comical in the early book, but it becomes really beautiful towards the end, where, she is asked about it by a different character, I forget who, or maybe it is Fred Vincy himself, and she says, well, he is the only man I have ever loved, and I think that mirrors, Dorothy and Ladislaw very well, in that they really combine despite what everybody thinks should happen, and sort of going against that public opinion is where we get the two moments that I think are really beautiful in the book. And the last part that I would like to talk about is, I think George Eliot was a phenomenal writer in all of this. Her own perspective, giving her upbringing in a provincial life, and then she went on to disconnect herself from all that and become the person that we know her as today in London, and really go against the expected ideas of marriage, because she was expected. She didn't like ever really formally marry this man because he was already married, but she still like held him very, very close, and they called each other husband and wife, and even though they weren't seen as that in the public eye, so long as they had that connection within themselves, they were sufficient for each other. And, you know, that's a theme we see in Middlemarch. Because she has seen both of, you know, a rural lifestyle as well as the sort of more urban lifestyle in London, one being more socially conservative, one being more focused on reform. I think that George Eliot does an amazing job in this novel of providing a nuanced synthesis of both rural and urban life, and how rural life reacts to all this development happening around it. Yeah, I thought it was a great book. George Eliot's writing style sort of mirrors that of Hugo or Dickens in the way that it addresses the reader. And it can kind of be surreal looking back on that, just because, you know, you read a lot of newer books and it's become a sort of cardinal sin to address the reader directly unless you're writing nonfiction, but I thought it was a great read, and I loved it a lot. And if you're interested in those themes of long-spanning character arcs, feminism, social reform, and, you know, being able to study how a town reacts to social reform, I think this is a perfect read for you. Again, I read the Penguin Classics version, and I loved it. It was great.